Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Mexi here once again, and I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog, or most people call it Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 for the Xbox 360/PlayStation 3. So, last time, we've essentially did manage able to tackle through some more stages in Journey Forms of Silver's Very Hard mode, ranging from White Acropolis, Radical Train, and finally Aquatic Base. So overall, we actually did those stages quite well, especially noticeable concerning for the fact that we've got, once again, 3 A ranks in a row, because I was expecting to able to actually get myself a glorious S rank, but I was literally so close in some instances. Well, apart from those side things though, we did those stages just fine, despite the fact that in Journey Forms have been Aquatic Base though, that obviously though I did somehow die a couple of times. Journey Forms have been the actual silver metallic ball puzzle segment. Well, as a result, no matter what though, that was technically the final time we're going to be seeing that silver metallic ball as a platform kind of gimmick, because as a result, by this point in onwards, is that we are straight to the point that we're about to be able to almost nearly at the end, for the sake of the forms of getting some progression, for able to experiencing the majority of very hard missions, or in some cases very hard mode for this whole entire DLC. Well, no matter what though, is about the fact that, like I said before, it's just for bragging rights, unless if you really want to go up for the challenge, which as a result, yeah, that's what I can really say about that. So today, for this video, is about the fact that, as you can tell, we've somehow gone back into Kingdom Valley again, but except this time we're about to tackle through Silver's Very Hard mode in the forms of in Kingdom Valley. So no matter what though, from what I can tell, it plays very identical to the forms of how it does it in the normal mode, alongside with hard mode versions of Kingdom Valley as Silver. The only differences being this time around though, is obviously they're trying to able to actually bring more stronger enemies to the table, and that's all there is to it. So because of that though, yeah, there's nothing more I can really add about this, especially noticeable because by this point in time, about the fact that until next week, it might actually be the final set of videos is about to be coming for the sake of the forms of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, before we move on to the next batch of Sonic Let's Plays, just before when Sonic Cross Shadow Generations is coming out. So as a result, no matter what though, I'm still basically excited for it. So because of that though, yeah, speaking of which though, is about the fact that, well, today's date of course here is the 12th of April today, in some cases in 2024 today. So relatively speaking though, is about the fact that there are some interesting things just recently happened. Well, first of all, before we get into more details on that specific topic though, that's what appears to be about the fact that recently, I suppose I totally forgot to mention about, not just by the forms of in 2 days ago, but also for 3 days ago, or technically 4 days ago actually. That's what appears to be about the fact that now, we've already did somehow manage to able to mention about the celebration of the 1-year anniversary of the film's release of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Well, as it turns out, there was actually some even more anniversaries that somehow turned up, which one of them is actually a film, and the other one which appears to be a video game of all things. So, for instance, it's about the fact that, well, happy 5th anniversary of the film's release of Zuzam, which I've heard about it, but I've never actually seen it before, but I do know for a fact that it's usually been the part of the DC superheroes lineup. So because of that though, yeah, I'm a little bit optimistic about that. And as far as the video game is concerned, well, suffice to say, happy 2nd anniversary of the game's release of LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, which as a result, yeah, it's pretty crazy to able to believe that that particular game has been out for 2 years, since 2022, because it was originally going to be released in June at some point after the release of The Rise of Skywalker, but as a result it's got delayed due to the forms of you-know-what. And relatively speaking, I was about the fact that I can at least appreciate about the fact that that particular game alone did somehow manage able to receive multiple versions of the game, ranging from PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X/S, and even PC, as well as the glorious Nintendo Switch. Now, as far as I'm usually concerned with the forms of what's to expect to happen also, is about the fact that I'm pretty much guessing this correctly, about the fact that we've only just got about a couple of weeks left until specifically Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door Remake for the Switch is definitely going to be coming. So all we need left now is, of course, we are still waiting for the overview trailer might able to show up for the sake of the films of this amazing remake, which I'm really hoping they're able to actually contain some even more additional content that was not found in the original version of the game. But we shall see what happens in due time. So because of that though, yeah, and also, another thing I want to point out as well is that, did you guys know about the fact that, well, recently, Kung Fu Panda 4 has recently came out to be released in journey forms of home media? Well, to be more specifically, in the actual digital format. To be more accurate, though, is about the fact I'm pretty sure it only happens in the Americas so far, which, if I'm assuming so anyway, well, as it turns out, is about the fact that they're gonna able to contain a new animated short by the forms of the actual short film, which actually focuses on Po as well as the forms of Zuan, and basically as they about to battle over with those dumplings, so reign supreme. So no matter what though, it feels remarkably similar to one of those scenes with Po and Master Shifu from the likes of in the first film, for what I can guess. So no matter what though, the actual short film is gonna say Dueling Dumplings. So yeah, this is gonna be interesting, especially noticeable. I couldn't imagine about the fact that maybe if it's any possibilities about the fact that if that particular short film will go alongside with the release of the DVD/Blu-ray for the sake of the forms of Kung Fu Panda 4, and so specifically by that time and during the forms of in summer sometime. To be more accurate though, either in June or July or August, depending on the forms of how to factor if the actual confirmation for these release dates have been addressed. So that's what I was going to be able to expect for this point. So, and yes, for those of you probably wondering, in terms of the forms of Silver's very hard mode, and that's what appears to be about the fact that, well, let's just get this out of the way, is that obviously, I've already mentioned about this before, about the fact that, as you can tell, we've now gone back into Kingdom Valley, but also straight things to the point about the fact that we also going to be able to tackle through Flame Core, which appears to be the final stage for Silver, and straight to the point, this will be the final time we're going to be not only going to be playing as Silver, but also we're going to be able to play as Sonic for the final time, for the sake of the forms of this entire playthrough, because at this point in time, until next week, it's going to be the last 3 of those specific videos coming up. To be more accurate though, for the sake of the forms of the majority of very hard mode for Shadow, which as a result, then again, we'll talk more about that until when it gets to the point until next week for sure. So, anyway, oh yeah, let's talk about the forms of another topic at this point. Sadly to tell you is about the fact that I did manage to able to ask Cap King 74 to able to actually just decide able to join in for a bit, for able to actually decide able to tackle through multiplayer for Sonic 06. I mean, obviously though, that particular series of videos has been cancelled due to the forms of, probably because the forms of the actual multiplayer is really unbalanced, and not to mention though, that for I've heard about the fact that Stuart has pretty much had enough to able to actually experience the whole entire game, since by the end of, let's just say, by the end of 2022, I'm pretty sure. Well, mind you, that was around that time, just before when Christmas decides to come along, for the sake of the forms of that specific year. So, anyway, yeah, it's kind of unfortunate about the fact that multiplayer is not going to happen, which, as a result, you won't be missing much. Especially noticeable because, like I said before, multiplayer in this game is pretty unbalanced, especially noticeable because, relatively speaking, it's about the fact that if you manage to play as Silver, that he runs like a snail, basically. And on top of that, Sonic's gems abilities will be downright broken, especially noticeable in battle mode, because you can easily become a massive cheater if you manage to able to try to utilize the gems during the forms of in battle mode, which obviously battle mode is likely a competitive mode, whilst in tag though, you obviously have to cooperate to each other to complete certain stages, as you probably already expect. So, and relatively speaking, that's as far as I can try to able to explain about this particular multiplayer of what it does contain. Although you're still able to actually go through the exactly same stages as before, ranging from, Wave Ocean, Dusty Desert, White Acropolis, Crisis City, Flame Core, as well as the forms of Kingdom Valley and Aquatic Base. However, there's only 2 stages that has not been playable in multiplayer, which there are Radical Train, as well as Tropical Jungle, as well as the End of the World itself as well, just because no matter what though, yeah, you probably get the idea for this point. So, but yeah, as I said before, this is going to be the final time we're going to be playing as Sonic with the addition of the forms of those gems, which means about the fact that, yeah, it's going to be unfortunate we're not going to be playing as the best playable character in the game, at least in my eyes though, but relatively speaking though, because we are getting very, very, very close towards the end of this, basically, which I think I've already established that before, so... Anyways, let's get into the forms of another discussion and I'd like to point things out. And that's what appears to be about the fact that recently, about the fact that the next Mortal Kombat 1 DLC is about to be coming, and it's going to be due out in during forms of this month. Specifically, that if you're trying to able to actually access to early access players, that it will be able to be accessible on the 16th of April. But as it turns out, it's going to be releasing until the 23rd of April, and that character will goes to Ermac, which as a result for Mortal Kombat 1 is definitely going to be able to bring back Ermac. So yeah, kind of interesting about the fact that I was expecting about the fact that Ermac will become playable from the start, but as it turns out he is now a part of the DLC. So that honestly caught me off guard a little bit. Well, mind you, I still haven't experienced Mortal Kombat for a very long time. Last is mainly because I'm not very good at the forms of those types of 2D fighting games, unlike Super Smash Bros. That I'm pretty much an expert at it. So, some exceptions mind you though, but that's besides the point. So, anyways, there's also another thing I want to point out as well, and that's what appears to be about the fact that, yes indeed, about the fact that recently, we've actually got ourselves a full-on confirmation for the sake of the forms of the most recent event, for the sake of the forms of some Sonic fans, or specifically, Shadow fans alike. And that, ladies and gentlemen, it has been confirmed that Sega has recently announced the forms of the Year of Shadow, which as a result, yes indeed, about the fact that 2024 is going to be the equivalent to 2013's Year of Luigi, except now it's going to be Shadow's turn when it comes to likely the Year of kind of theme to it. But except the fact that no matter what though, they did somehow manage able to address certain events for the Year of Shadow. Like for instance, they did somehow manage able to contain 2 of those trailers. One is the forms of the English version, and the other one which appears to be body forms of the Japanese version. And I'm gonna say, the Japanese version looks a lot more cool and awesome looking, whilst compared to the English version, it's not too bad. It's just about the fact I love the actual art style with the actual hand drawings and stuff like that. But aside from those side things though, I honestly do prefer the Japanese version just because it looks a little bit more awesome looking, at least to me anyway. So, and it's also worth noting for is about the fact that when it comes to the forms of the logo itself, of the Year of Shadow is actually pretty cool as well to me. Like for instance, they did somehow set the forms of the Year of Shadow, but before that or after that, it appears to be body forms that does manage to show us Fearless. So as a result, the actual name for that, it appears to be Fearless Year of Shadow, which obviously because we're about to hear from not only for the sake of the forms of Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, but also with the forms of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 as well, for the movie anyway. So, now in terms of the forms of what specific news they did somehow bring ourselves into for the Fearless Year of Shadow, which as a result they did somehow mention about the forms of there's going to be, yes indeed, a new Shadow Lego set, which appears to be it does manage to comes with not only Shadow himself, but also with the motorcycle parts as well. So generally speaking, it's about the fact that relatively speaking, I think it's gonna call it Shadow the Hedgehog Escape Plan, or perhaps even maybe because it might actually call it something else, but we shall see what happens in due time. And on top of that, they're also going to be able to actually bring us into some Fearless events in not only in Sonic Forces Mobile, but also with the forms of Sonic Dash as well, for a chance to unlock powerful Shadow variants for not only for Shadow himself, but also with Super Shadow, Captain Shadow, Dragon Hunter, Lancelot, even Sir Lancelot from Sonic and the Black Knight, and even especially noticeable with the forms of Vampire Shadow, as well as the forms of, I would classify for saying this, is that there's also the forms of, I think that's as far as I can say about it when it comes to the forms of certain variants for Shadow the Hedgehog in regards to the forms of the playable characters from not only for the likes of in Sonic Dash but also with Sonic Forces Mobile as well. So yeah, relatively speaking no, despite the fact that I've technically already unlocked them in the past anyway, so I don't have to necessarily try to worry about trying to able to go for this entire event itself. What I will say this right now is about the fact that there is technically some collectibles you can able to get during the forms within that specific event recently in Sonic Dash, and that's what it appears to be. You can able to actually collect some familiar items based off from Shadow the Hedgehog himself, ranging from, you know, the hover boots as well as the forms of, or hover shoes to be more specifically, in addition to the forms of this little rings around his wrists, and even especially noticeable with the Chaos Emerald to signify Chaos Control. Specifically, he always attempts able to bring a green Chaos Emerald because that is the most iconic thing ever since in Sonic Adventure 2, and even especially noticeable, maybe it's possible that he might able to actually use the green Chaos Emerald in the third Sonic movie, if that makes sense. So, anyway, in addition to that, a familiar logo from the likes of Shadow the Hedgehog with that particular red-ish kind of icon to it does somehow make its appearance, alongside with the forms of the same thing as what happens in during forms of Sonic Cross Shadow generations. So, and when you're trying to load up the forms of Sonic Dash while the Fearless Year of Shadow is going to be happening, I will say, the actual image does look kind of cool. Even especially noticeable, they did somehow recently bring up some new renders for not just by the forms of Sonic, but also with Shadow as well. And yeah, it looks pretty cool to me. Especially noticeable, I'm just really looking forward to know if how the fact that, well, obviously, like I mentioned this before, that 2024 is going to be the true definition of the Year of Shadow, of course, because obviously that two of those upcoming projects, including the honorable mention, which appears to be Lego Shadow, will be coming. So yeah, I'm very excited about this, especially noticeable that it's a shame about the fact that Sega never actually brought up for the sake of the forms of trying to able to focus on Silver, which I have no idea how to explain this, because I know for a fact it's been about 2 days ago since I actually have last played this game for sure. I mean, let's face it though, because recently that Tiana, she's now able to actually focusing on the next floor for the likes of the forms of Princess Peach Showtime. So, well, we're not exactly sure how long does that particular Let's Play will be last hold for, which as a result, then again, she will talk more about that until in the future parts and onwards. So, and as for this point in time though, it's about the fact that, well, relatively speaking though, that I'm kind of believed by saying this is about the fact that we've almost at the halfway point already in joining forms within April. So, relatively speaking though, that's as far as I can try and able to explain any of that. So, I kind of wish that though about the fact that we can able to actually try to mention something else, apart from the fact that with all these random tips and stuff like that. But aside from all that stuff though, yeah, let's talk about the forms of another news. They did somehow address something for the sake of the forms of the Year of Shadow. Like, for instance, is about the fact that they also mentioned Sonic Speed Cafe. The official Sonic the Hedgehog themed restaurant is serving up new locations, menu items, merchandise, and much more, featuring Shadow Project themes, photo ops, and menu items. Some to come and celebrate the Year of Shadow, and we'll stay tuned for some other stuff. So yeah, this should be interesting, especially noticeable because, well, obviously they still managed able to bring ourselves some familiar food selection for the time being, which appears to be Sonic's classic chili dogs, as well as knuckle sandwiches, blue blurs, swooshies, and gold rings, and more. So yeah, nothing else to really say about that, I guess. And also they decided able to mention about the forms of Sonic Symphony World Tour again, except this time what appears to be by the forms of the World Tour will now feature original Shadow scores along with some of the some of his coolest moments on screen. So it could be something related to the actual a flashback between, I don't know, with Sonic Adventure 2, or even Sonic Heroes, or Shadow the Hedgehog. Well, we shall see what happens in due time, especially noticeable because, relatively speaking, we're still on April after all. So, anyway, and they're also able to actually mention about the forms of this pretty cool vehicle, which appears to be by the forms of MotoGP, Red Bull, Grand Prix, and no matter what though, they did somehow manage able to actually bring ourselves into. It's a year of Shadow, so we are bringing a custom Shadow-inspired motorcycle to life, and we are taking it on tour. So first up, it will be Moto Grand Prix or MotoGP, Red Bull Grand Prix of the Americans in Aston TX from the Sacred Thief forms of recently today, all the way up to the 14th of April. So yeah, this will be interesting, especially noticeable about the fact that I really wish if I want to see this in person. But unfortunately though, it's about the fact that the actual weather conditions is still pretty terrible, and as a result, I'm getting so sick of this. Especially noticeable, for the love of God, we're in spring after all, which I was really hoping about the fact that they're able to actually bring nice sunny weathers for the time being. But unfortunately though, in Junior forms within the UK anyway, our weather conditions is actually gone pretty sluggish recently. So I was not expecting about the forms of weather conditions goes like pretty downhill and all that stuff. So, but as you can tell already, it's about the fact that we've already finished up the forms of Kingdom Valley, and relatively speaking, that's not going to be the final time we're going to be able to actually seeing Kingdom Valley, because it wasn't until whenever we get to Shadow's Very Hard mode, and you'll see why. So, anyway, and of course, they somehow mentions about the forms of Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, which we've already on about that ever since in Journey forms of by the end of January in this year. But I'm still looking forward to it though still, even though it's kind of weird about the fact that they've never actually bring some new information just yet, especially noticeable with the release date on there as well. But maybe, just maybe, and during at some point in May, I'm pretty sure it might be a possibility that we might able to actually see Sonic Central Direct coming up, which as a result, maybe they'll try to mention something related to that. Even especially noticeable that just like the forms of how it does it in, let's just say in 2021, alongside with the forms of 2022, even last year in 2023, maybe there might be a possibility they might try to advertise alongside with the forms of that particular animated short film, which as a result to go alongside with the actual release of the game. Like for instance, back in 2021, that somehow we received Sonic Colors Ultimate to go alongside with the release of the forms of this animated short film, which appears to be let's just say Sonic Colors Rise of the Wisps. And meanwhile, in 2022, that we did somehow manage to get ourselves this animated prologue for the likes of Sonic Frontiers. And in Journey forms have been 2023 last year, which to go alongside with the release of Sonic Superstars, that it did somehow manage to able to receive a short animated film, which that was before when the actual film decides to come out. And I think that's as far as I can think about it, which I'm pretty sure it might actually do the exact same treatment as the forms have been this year in 2024, so able to actually just to go alongside with the release of, you know, Sonic Cross Shadow Generations after all. So, but yeah, and no matter what though, and of course we can never forget to mention about Sonic 3, the movie, which ironically enough, it never seemed able to actually bring that up on the actual news reports recently, which I'm not exactly sure why though. Well, I suppose that time will tell, especially noticeable about the fact that after all, we're still on the forms of in April, like I said before. So yeah, you get the idea for that point. So anyways, there's also another thing I want to point out as well. As it turns out, back in the past anyway, that I accidentally mentioned about the forms of something related to Dragon Ball Z related, where about the fact that technically that beam struggles was actually kind of a, you know, kind of an introductioning thing for the English version for the sake of the forms of, you know, certain Dragon Ball Z games. Like, for instance, the first one in the lineup, which appears to be Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3, to able to actually introduce beam struggles in the international players. Well, as it turns out, no matter what though, I was completely wrong, because as a result, the beam struggles for certain Dragon Ball Z games was technically started back in 1993 with, let's just say, Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden 2 for the Super Nintendo, at least for I've heard anyway. So generally speaking, it was about the fact that despite I haven't exactly play that game, but that's just mainly because no matter what though, it was only exclusive for Japan for the time, although as far as I did somehow discover something that is also available on these certain European countries from Spain or just any other like European countries in general, which I was not expecting that, which as a result, that unlike the forms of how it does it in the Japanese exclusive Sega Saturn game called Dragon Ball Z Shin Butoden, which as a result it did came out in 1995 in the Sega Saturn, but only in Japan. Whilst, usually relatively speaking though, I was not really able to know about the fact that not only does Super Butoden 1 and 2 and 3 did manage to also came out in Europe, but it was also same place with the forms of Dragon Ball Z Hyper Dimension for the Super Nintendo as well. So I was not expecting for that particular release. So anyway, and also, I just want to point things out for the sake of time though, and that's what appears to be about the fact that apparently though, speaking of Dragon Ball related, that's what appears to be about the fact that apparently though, both Android 18 from Dragon Ball Super, alongside with the forms of Fidel, also from Dragon Ball Super, both of those characters will be playable in Journey forms of at some point, alongside with the forms of the actual release of the first chapter of the Future Saga DLC. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. So we're not exactly sure when does the actual date will be confirmed for that particular DLC in mind, but I suppose we'll have to find out and join at some point in the later months to come. So, but anyway, so, and also something's worth noting for as well, and that's what appears to be about the fact that I've just noticed something right from the start, is that for one, we're now able to actually have the checkpoints before we get to the nearly at the end of the stage, as you can see. So at the very least, we don't have to worry about the forms of a lot of combat involved this time around though, which I guess that's a good thing. And second of all, I do realize about something, is that in Journey forms of in Mario Party 9, for I've looked upon the forms of the actual trivia recently, and as it turns out, it's about the fact that Mario Party 9 is the last Super Mario game to support the Dolby Pro Logic 2 standard, which actually functions as, which allows home console video games to output the 5.1 stereo sound when feed through an inappropriate decoder. And relatively speaking though, that Nintendo had introduced or had included Pro Logic 2 encoding in numerous Mario titles since Super Mario Sunshine in 2002. So no matter what though, that was actually kind of interesting, concerning for the fact that usually Super Mario Sunshine did first came out in 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube, but until 10 years later, likely in Mario Party 9, that was the final Mario game to able to incorporate with this particular Dolby Pro Logic 2 symbol, which as a result, by this point and onwards, it just somehow becomes absent for the sake of not only for the Wii U era, but also with the Nintendo Switch era as well. So yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting fact right there, especially noticeable thanks to someone out there did somehow address that. So, but as you can see, no matter what though, we did somehow once again demolish this particular little egg thingy right there, which as a result that, well, the only time is a little bit tricky this time around though in this section right here, and that's what appears to be about the fact that yes indeed, the enemies now attempt to show up. So, and there we go folks, that's all the stages for Silver's Very Hard mode, and I'm gonna say that it goes by very well, except the fact that I did somehow die occasionally during the forms of in Dusty Desert due to the forms of, let's just say the bad camera angles, and on top of that with Flame Core, that I did somehow accidentally die due to the forms of this not paying attention to the meter. So, alongside with the forms of this unexpected death in the beginning of Kingdom Valley. So with that being said folks, is that we got endings at this point right here. So join me next time for more Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. It's that we're going on to the final piece of DLC, and that's what appears to be Shadow's Very Hard mode. So, oh boy, I'll see you guys next week. Later fellas.